Well, this is Paul Schneiderman today in the 108th edition of the Sports Untold podcast, also on Rainier Avenue Radio. My special guest today is former UW Husky quarterback, legend NFL player Steve Pelluer. And my podcast is now also on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, Google, iTunes, and some other outlets. You can go to sportsuntoldpodcast.com. Let me get back to you, Steve. You were just mentioning that you're former teammate Jim Rogers has a podcast going. Go ahead. I cut you off a second. Go share a little bit more about what Jim's doing with his podcast.
Well, I think he was instrumental in getting the Don James statue out in front of Heck Ed and kind of re-entered the Seattle Puget Sound community a couple years ago after being all over the world, and so I was able to reconnect with him, and he had started in real estate, and that's been my business for about the last 20 years. So I was trying to kind of help him enter into the business, but he soon found, with his affiliation with University of Washington and his passion for Husky football, he decided to do some interviews and videos, and so he just started with like Sonny Six Killer and a lot of the old favorites. I think who's the big offensive tackle from Snohomish that lost his foot, Kurt Marsh, and then a lot of not so big names like Gertrude Peoples, the administrator that helped so many athletes over the years, and so it's just been really fun. I've only seen one of his podcasts, but he's got like 40 or 50 of them. I guess, and I don't know if they're podcasts necessarily or YouTube videos or what, but he really has a passion for it and does a nice job.
That's great, Steve. I'm going to get connected to Jim Rogers. I told you off the air I've had your colleague Mark Pattison on a couple times, who also has a great podcast. So I definitely appreciate you sharing a little bit about Jim Rogers. Let me get back to you, Steve. So Steve Pelluer is a graduate of Interlake High School in Bellevue outside of Seattle. Steve's a UW football legend. I remember when you led the Huskies to a 28-0 win over Iowa in I think it was 82 Rose Bowl. Steve set a whole bunch of UW passing records. Steve, I think, left the UW as a second career leader in passing yards. Steve played in NFL for Dallas, Kansas City, and played in the CFL and played for the Frankfurt Galaxy of the World League of American Football. So Steve comes from a very athletic family. His son Zeke is now a member of the Husky football team. But really appreciate you coming on the 108th edition of Sports Untold, also on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Yeah, thanks. No, it's an honor to be here.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, your family has such a athletic tradition, and I kind of like you to share a little bit about how you got the football bug at a young age. And if you could share a little about your late dad, Artie Pollura, as well, who played at WSU, and what you share about your kind of your family heritage and how you got the football bug.
Sure. Yeah, I think it helped just to have an older brother and then a younger brother as well. So and we grew up in Spokane with a big backyard that really just turned into a football field, and just recall just heading outside at every moment. I think my athletic affinity probably started with my grandfather, who his name was Carl Gustafson, and he actually was a running back for the Cougars, and won the Bowler Medal at Washington State. Was a prolific running back, and so I just recall him, getting me out in the backyard with these old ancient baseball gloves and just playing catch. Just taught me how to play catch, and so that was kind of my first memory. And then my father, Arnie, was a track coach and cross-country coach at Whitworth, which is Whitworth College in Spokane.
Sure.
So, he would bring home like he brought home a high jump pit, and we put it in the backyard. So we practiced high jumping, and then he'd take us down to the field house and we'd run around, and just, we were always, outside doing sports as much as we can, mostly football, but, also some baseball and basketball. So that's kind of my early memories, and, just had a great affinity for my father, who would take me to his cross-country meets and always have me tagging along, and, just really looked up to him. And so, when he passed away at 10 years old, it was a real traumatic thing for us to, not have a father that could help nurture us emotionally, spiritually, and obviously with the athletics as well. But my mom was a PE major as well, and so she kind of took on that role, and she could have been a coach in her own right. So
what a great family history. And we hear about people talking about gene replacement therapy. Boy, I got to get some of these Pollura family athletic genes. It's just incredible that the heritage you have of these great athletes. Steve, one part of your life that has always interested me, and I'm about 8 years younger than you, but I followed your career and certainly knew who you were before we met. And you came from a couple generations of WSU family members. Tell us about your decision as a teenager to pick the University of Washington. That must have been a very tough decision for you.
it was hard, just because, ever since my older brother was there, I mean, even listening to his games as a freshman on the radio, with the Throwing Samoan, I mean, I was a big Cougar fan, and we would travel over to the games, and, I got to know, his buddies in the fraternity. I got to know, a lot of his teammates. So, but I think the thing that really was a huge influence was living on the west side of the mountains, and having, like, Tom Flick was the quarterback ahead of me at Interlake. And so to see him go to Washington and have success there, and then actually the quarterback just before me, his name was Chris O'Connor.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
He went to the University of Washington and didn't play quarterback, but ended up playing a lot as a strong safety. So, just to have this tradition of athletes come from my high school and have success at Washington was very, very appealing. And, I sure had a fondness for Washington State, but just seeing the success that Washington had, and Don James, and the powerful teams that they had, it being so close, was pretty attractive.
It's interesting, Steve, you mentioned that Tom Flick and Chris O'Connor had some influences in your decision to pick the UW.
Yeah, and my brother had played with Tom, and so, I had certainly followed his career, and Warren Moon had got him to the Rose Bowl, so they were just kind of getting to national prominence with Coach James. So, and the Cougars had done fairly well. The Throwing Samoan had kind of brought them to prominence, and they had. I remember listening to them upset Nebraska in Nebraska, which was a huge win. But I just felt like I wanted to be a part of a really successful program. I had a lot of respect for Coach James, and so it was hard to step away from family tradition, but I just kind of felt like I wanted to chart my own path to some degree.
Paul Schneiderman, the host of the Sports Untold podcast, also on Rainier Avenue Radio with UW legend Steve Pelluer. We're also on Facebook Live today, and I invite the audience to submit some questions here in this interview with this legendary sports figure. Steve, I mentioned in the introduction at the very beginning that you had an amazing game in that Washington victory over Iowa. I believe it was in the '82 Rose Bowl. Was that the biggest highlight of your UW football career, that Rose Bowl victory, and your role in it?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely in the top three, I think. Just that whole setting, the pageantry, the um, you know, the whole Puget Sound community getting behind that Rose Bowl tradition, everybody traveling down to Pasadena. It was just a thrill to be there, and that, to be able to practice in Newport Beach, 10 days before the game and spend holidays down there. It was really cool. But I think probably my favorite moment was my senior year when we came back and beat Michigan at Husky Stadium when we were down 14 points with 7 minutes to go, and we're able to come back and go for 2 and win that game. So I think that's probably my favorite play and moment. But I think my favorite experience would definitely be that Rose Bowl.
That Michigan win was a huge early 80s win. Thank you for sharing that with us. Steve, I got to ask you maybe a little bit of a kind of tough question, but I'm really curious. So you were 7-1 as the Huskies starting quarterback, but you lost a starting job to Tim Cowan the following year. Did that upset you?
Oh yeah, no, it was very. I mean, I loved Tim. We had a good relationship, and he actually won the job my sophomore year, and then got hurt, and so that's kind of what gave me the opportunity to play and help get the Huskies to the Rose Bowl. So, everybody kind of expected me after having that Rose Bowl year to continue to be the starter all that year. But, we got upset by Stanford after being ranked number 1 in the nation. And I just remember just feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders at that time. I mean, I just was carrying a lot of pressure. I was just a young kid, and that it just, it was, it was a lot to deal with at that age. And so, I didn't really know how to handle that kind of pressure. And so I think it did affect my performance and my confidence. And so it took a while to regain that.
I had Keith Gilbertson on my show a couple years ago, Steve, and you'll probably relate to this very much. Keith, and I'm paraphrasing what he said one of the toughest jobs in Seattle is being the UW quarterback.
Yeah, no, I look at what Dylan Morris and Sam Hewitt are having to face these days, and I'm like, man, it's what I dealt with is like 5-fold, more pressure on them. I mean, for Sam to be a 5-star guy coming out of high school at, what is he, 18? Just the expectations, especially with his dad being an NFL quarterback. I mean, it takes a lot of mental toughness, I think, these days. And I'm amazed at some of these kids that come out as freshmen and light the world on fire. It's like, gosh, how do they do that? How are they so mature to be able to handle that kind of pressure?
Well, a different era, you definitely had some pressures as well, but it's interesting to bring up a couple of the current Husky quarterbacks that they've gone through. Well, Steve, your son Zeke is the UW, as I mentioned at the very beginning, and he's on the Husky roster and getting some time. Can I pick your brain at all on the Caleb? I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right. The Caleb DeBoer hiring. Is it DeBauer or DeBoer? I keep getting his last name mixed up.
I don't even know. I'm sure I've heard it on the news broadcast, but I'm not even sure, that I've heard it that often.
What's your take on the hiring? Any thoughts as a father of a guy on the team and an alum? I'm just kind of curious to pick your brain.
I'm excited. I mean, I like the fact that he started at Sioux Falls and was able to have great success there and as a head coach and then really my only experience watching him was in the Fresno State UCLA game, just watching him on the sidelines, and that was just a nail biter. And I just witnessed him on the sideline just being cool and calm and confident, and I was like, man, how is he doing that? I mean, it was just such a big game, and he just seemed to handle it really well. So I was like, wow, that just was really impressed by that and really respected that.
As a casual fan, Steve, one thing I like about Caleb is he seems like a very regular guy, and he admits he has some brains to pick and stuff to learn. We don't always hear that from people these days as much, do we? So
No, not in this era.
right, right.
That's for sure.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to his hiring. Steve, Jimmy Lake came under some scrutiny over the sidelines incident and so forth. When you played, would it have been that big of a deal if a coach pushed a player in the way that Lake did? Are we just like living in a different era where stuff like that's a bigger deal than maybe it used to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is different. I mean, I think in my era, I think it would have been ignored probably and not really thought of. It just seemed like the typical thing. But yeah, I think these days, coaches have, and anybody in leadership has to be a lot more cautious in terms of, how they handle themselves.
Right. See, we're going to take a kind of a lap around a whole bunch of different subjects today. I want to go back to some of your thoughts on the Huskies and your pro career. But these are two questions I've been asking guests for the last couple of years now, and I always get the most amazing answers. Who's a living sports figure you would love to interview and have a conversation with? And who's a deceased sports figure in history you would have loved to have interviewed or chatted with?
Well, I think, one of my favorites growing up was Vince Lombardi. I think I would love to pick his brain a little bit. I mean, he's just such a legendary figure. So, somebody that's no longer around, I think he would probably be the one. And then current figure, are you saying current figure that's still playing or not necessarily?
Yeah. However you want to answer, it can be just a current sports figure who still have a commissioner, a manager, a player, a retired player, just someone that's still with us in the sports world that you would just think would be a fascinating person to chat with.
I don't know. I saw a documentary on Barry Sanders and was just really intrigued by him. He just is such a humble guy. And, I think if I was to interview anybody, I'd love to pick his brain a little bit more and, what it was like for him to step out at the peak of his career pretty much. I mean, and maybe it's just because that interview on TV was fresh in my mind, but he was a real intriguing guy to me.
None of my guests had answered Barry Sanders yet. A terrific answer to that question of a living sports figure that a person would love to chat with. And I think maybe one other person mentioned Vince Lombardi, but those are two great answers you gave. So two definitely fascinating sports figures there in sports history. Any thoughts, Steve, on this whole college playoff debate? Would you like to go to a top 16 format, or do you like the Final Four? Would you like a top 6? What are your thoughts on that whole issue, Steve?
I haven't put a lot of thought into it, but 4 does seem pretty narrow. Yeah, I'd say if I had to vote, I'd vote for 6 or 8 over 4.
I've heard the idea of maybe having a top 6 and giving the top 2 a bye. Could you go along with something like that, maybe?
Oh, I don't think I'd like that. No,
I
think I'd prefer either 4 and 8. The thing about it is, I actually got to talk to Chris Peterson yesterday or day before about just the whole landscape of college football, and he just reiterated that these kids have no time. I mean, it is a year-round thing, and when they do rest, it's they don't want to do anything else but just rest. And so having more than 8 just seems like it'd be going the wrong way and just putting more and more time on those athletes.
You're a real admirer of Coach Peterson, Steve?
I am, yeah. When I was able to kind of go through his Built for Life pitch a little bit when my son was recruited, and I just, I could see why parents would want to have their kids, come be mentored at the University of Washington to be in the program and help these men turn into men.
Has coaching ever interested you, Steve?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, I still kind of go back and forth whether I'd like to coach, not on a collegiate level or anything like that, but just even, younger kids, or, I coached a little bit in high school football, but not necessarily football. I mean, I would love to coach volleyball or basketball, or, I just really like basketball, football, volleyball are my top three sports just because they're so team oriented.
Well, I saw your Husky colleague Greg Lewis last night, and Greg has coached girls basketball for many years, so you can.
I did not know that.
Yeah, Greg did that. So it's you're not the first former Husky to coach a sport outside of football. So I want to mention that Greg's done some girls basketball coaching. Well, Steve, I want to talk about your pro career, and I had your Husky friend and former colleague Mark Pattison on a couple times, and I paraphrased. I'm going to have the right quote, but Mark said that dying and going to football heaven was playing for the Los Angeles Raiders in the 1980s. Was playing for the Dallas Cowboys in the 1980s, kind of like going to football heaven.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was really excited when I got drafted there, and just because I had followed them all growing up. I mean, I loved Roger Staubach. I loved Coach Landry. Their defense was legendary. Their receivers, their running backs. So yeah, it was a thrill to be able to go there with, Tony Dorsett was still there. Ed Too Tall Jones was still there. Tony Hill, Danny White was still there. So a lot of the guys that had won, world championships were still involved. And so it was pretty cool.
Is a young guy joining the Cowboys, Steve? A lot of those legendary guys, were they pretty kind reaching out to you and some of the younger players when you were a rookie?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little intimidating breaking in as a rookie, but it didn't take long. I mean, I think they were pretty accepting and helpful, and so I think the interesting thing was just that there was this kind of aura around Tom Landry. I mean, even his coaches, I think, were a little bit intimidated by him, and so he just had an amazing presence.
I was going to ask you a question about Tom Landry, and I'm going to combine this question here with Don James. Were they similar as coaches and as human beings, Tom Landry and Don James?
I would say that they were quite similar, kind of cut out of that same old school mold in terms of, kind of commanding a lot of respect, very disciplined. Their expectation, you would never be late for a meeting. You would always, take your hat off. I mean, they were just old school, no hats in meetings, everybody, I don't know that everybody did, but most people call them sir, so, and the other thing is they both didn't have much to say, they weren't real, they were definitely not touchy-feely guys. They were, get about your business, and, it wasn't like they poked a lot of fun and joked around a whole lot. It was pretty business as usual for both of them. You
mentioned no hats, Steve, and when you played for the Cowboys, but Tom Landry always wore that famous sort of cowboy hat, though, on the sidelines.
Yeah. No, it was just no hats in meetings.
Gotcha. Well, I was when I was preparing for your interview, I was just thinking about Tom Landry and Don James and getting your feedback, because they kind of remind me of each other from afar a little bit too. So I can kind of see. I have a question from Greg Roberts, our friend, and they're both in our same. He was in our same college fraternity. Greg wants to know, when are you going to show up and play Eastgate hoops?
Man, I'm almost back to the ability to play basketball. I had both of my knees replaced, and so I've got two straight legs now and no pain. So I don't think I could run the court for very long, but I could probably play half court. So tell Greg that if we can play half court, I'm probably much more accessible.
I think he's hearing it right now, but I will relay him the message as well. So, Steve, I remember your career reasonably well, and I as I was kind of going through your background, you had an amazing game in 1985 where you entered a close game for Dallas when Danny White and Gary Hogeboom, the two quarterbacks who were ahead of you in the lineup, were injured. And in your second series, you directed a 72-yard drive for a winning touchdown, leading the Cowboys to a victory that clinched a division title. Was that your most memorable NFL game, Steve, back in '85?
I do remember that now. I don't think it was my most memorable, though, because the one I remember is in the Meadowlands against the Giants when we lost and not when we won. For some reason, that one sticks in my mind even more because we kept coming back and coming back. And I remember coming to the sidelines and Coach Landry asked me, he's like, hey, should we go for it or should we kick a field goal? Because I think a field goal would have tied it maybe, and it would have been a long field goal. Raphael Septien was our kicker, and I said, let's kick it. And then he missed it, and I just kind of remember kicking myself that, if I had some balls, we would have gone for it. And so I kind of kicked myself for not kind of putting the responsibility on someone else, because I didn't have a lot of confidence that he could make that long a field goal. So, but it kind of took the pressure off myself and, put it on somebody else. And so I think that's the one that sticks in my mind because of the regret.
Those are obviously probably one of the toughest decisions in offense in football, is whether to kick a field goal or not, isn't it, Steve? Those are always close calls, aren't they?
Well, there is. I mean, especially when you kind of know the range of your kicker, and so, but I mean, the chances of, a touchdown from the 40-yard line is I can't remember how much time there was left, but I think there was only time left for one play. So,
Paul Schottenheimer, the host of Sports Untold podcast, also on Rainier Avenue Radio with Husky NFL legend Steve Pelluer. Steve, you grew up in the Seattle area. You live in the Seattle area now. Was there ever a side of you that wished you played for the Seattle Seahawks in your NFL career?
Yeah, I don't know that I ever talked to them. It's funny that on the day I was drafted, I decided to just stay at home that day and just see if I might get drafted in the top, I don't know, top 3 rounds or something like that. I think it was in the morning. It wasn't quite as a big event as it is today, but there was actually a Seahawk representative that called and said, hey, can I come to your house for the draft? And I was like, well, why would you want to come to my house? I didn't really, that's what I was thinking in my mind. I didn't ask him. And I just said, well, sure. I was like, I'm not sure I'm going to be at the house all day, but if I'm there, you can come. And so I think he might have come, is kind of my memory. And then I just told him, and I didn't get drafted like in the first 3 rounds. I said, hey, I got to go to class, but you're welcome to stay if you want. and so it was just kind of weird. I don't know if they thought that maybe I would be a free agent or if they were interested in me, but I just thought that was always funny that the Seahawks had somebody there with me, you know, in the early rounds of the draft.
That's an interesting story. Did you have an agent in those days?
I did. I think it was the same agent that Don James had used at the time, and so I kind of thought, well, you know, if Coach James, he's good for Coach James, he'd be good for me.
Um, did you enjoy your years playing for the Kansas City Chiefs?
Yeah, I think those were some of my favorite years, just because I really liked Coach Schottenheimer. I thought the offensive coordinator was top notch. You know, we had some great running backs, Christian Okoye and Barry Word. So I mean, it really helped to have a dynamic running game, and so I really enjoyed it there.
Steve, you mentioned Marty Schottenheimer. Some pundits believe he's the best coach who's not in the Hall of Fame. Do you think there's a good Hall of Fame case for Marty Schottenheimer?
Yeah, I I love Marty. He was a player's coach for sure. And you know, it was fun too, just seeing his son come to Seattle, because I remember him when he was in high school there and would come to practice. And so it's you know, it is too bad that he never won a Super Bowl, because he assembled some amazing staffs. I mean, the staff that we had when I was there, you know, included, you know, Tony Dungy was coaching the secondary. Bill Cowher was the linebacker coach. Bruce Arians was the tight end coach. Herm Edwards helped on the defense. Wow. You know, and I think I want to say that the coordinator for the Chiefs now, you know, was there on staff. I mean, it was just this all-star staff. I mean, that you know, all went on to be head coaches in the NFL. I mean, it was incredible.
Those are huge names, that staff. That there could be a
Yeah.
story on the coaching staff you played under. You got time for 10, 15 more minutes, Steve?
Sure.
Great,
Yeah.
great. I don't want to take too much of your time, and thank you so much for doing this. If we can rewind for a second, do you have any general thoughts on this whole college pay issue debate? What's your thinking on that whole issue, Steve?
I just think it's just changing the landscape so quickly. I mean, between that and you know, all these conferences vying for you know, TV money and switching, you know, their allegiances and all that stuff. I mean, it just seems like everything, you know, the transfer portal, you know, and it seems like a lot of it is really fueled by the desire for dollars. And so, I mean, and to some degree, I think it's good. I mean, these kids are sacrificing a lot. I mean, granted, they're being put to work, so to speak, but so I do think I like the fact that they're being rewarded, but you know, I do also think that the old days where there was allegiance and, you know, you had to put in your 2 or 3 years and then get an opportunity to play, you know, I miss the simpler times, you know. Now, you know, especially quarterback, you know, if you're not starting, you just enter the transfer portal and you go somewhere else. And so it's a lot different than the old days.
A lot there. There's all these, you know, complex Title IX issues, the college pay issue. It's really, I mean, there's so many different layers to it, aren't there?
Yeah. I didn't even think about the whole Title IX thing. I mean, yeah, it's gonna be a tricky thing to navigate in the next few years.
Yeah, it sure seems like it. Back up for a second. You know, we talked about Marty Schottenheimer. I had one of your former NFL quarterback colleagues on, Dave Craig, a couple months ago. And Dave mentioned something about Marty Schottenheimer that, as a fan, I thought was very interesting. He said he was one of the few head coaches that would attend special teams meetings. He was like that much of a detail guy. So Dave mentioned that when I had him on. So
yeah, I don't even remember that, but it doesn't surprise me. I mean, he was really good at letting his coordinators coach. I mean, he was a coach of the coaches, and really a guy that tried to bring everybody together. And so that doesn't surprise me at all.
Steve, I'm telling you, I'm going to hit on some. I told you we're going to hit on some different subjects. I'm going to give you now a question that may seem a little outside the box. Do you have a favorite sports movie?
I don't know. What's the one? Remember the Titans, probably. It's got to have to be my favorite. I mean, I like Hoosiers too, but something about Remember the Titans, I think really would have to be my favorite.
That movie's come up. Some other football movies that have come up in conversation: North Dallas 40, Rudy, We Are Marshall, Any Given Sunday. There's a few others that have come up. So
yeah.
You mentioned a good one with the Titans movie. Well, Steve, you've had a long career in commercial real estate, and I'd like you to share a little bit about your career to myself and the listeners. But can you share with how some of the skills you learned in football have helped your real estate career?
Yeah, I mean, I really think the whole team aspect of the give and take, and really trying to think of the other teammate before yourself, I think is been really important. A lot of my work is with nonprofits, primarily churches and private schools, and so I find myself working with a lot of volunteer boards and decision makers. And I mean, I think in sports I just learned a lot of patience, and I think it's served me well in this arena. And maybe it's a little bit of my personality, but you just have to be patient and be able to listen in this environment, because there's a lot of people that have vested interest in what happens.
This may be kind of a random, unique question, Steve, but is there anything similar at all to analyzing a commercial real estate proposition to maybe analyzing what plays to run in football? Do you see any very loose similarities at all in that realm at all?
I would have to say it's quite a bit different, but even in high school and college, I just had a great passion for real estate, much like my passion for athletics, and they are a bit different, but the creative aspect of real estate is, I think, what inspired me so much, that you can take kind of what looks like a dump and turn it into something really really pleasing and valuable. And so I think there's some element to that in football, that you can take a bunch of ragtag guys with some ability and with a common vision, turn it into something that works like a well-oiled machine. So, I mean, I think there are some similarities.
Thank you for building up my sloppy question. I was just trying to sort of think through how football and real estate can be connected in some ways. Paul Schottenheimer again. We got a few more minutes here with UW football legend Steve Pelluer on the Sports Untold podcast, also on Rainier Avenue Radio. Well, Steve, who's a quarterback in history that you've always really admired? It can be a deceased one or a living one. Any quarterback that you've always emulated in one way or another?
Well, I think my favorite growing up was Bart Starr, but I can hardly remember watching him play. It was so long ago. But I think after that, I really just was impressed by Roger the Dodger. And I think Staubach just had such a resiliency, just was such a great leader. You could tell that he was in command. And so I think he was probably my favorite overall.
Roger Staubach. Have you got to know Roger Staubach over the years?
Not real well. I mean, I was able to meet him a few times when I was in Dallas, and then he actually went into real estate and started a national, maybe even global real estate company, and ended up selling it. And so at one time it was called the Staubach Company, and I remember him coming to Seattle to kind of recruit some people, and I was thinking, man, that would be kind of cool to, join his company. I never did, but I always thought that would have been pretty cool to be a part of the Staubach Company.
I didn't know that he became a big real estate guy, Roger Staubach. Definitely a famous Hall of Fame quarterback. Steve, can you share a little bit about playing in Europe and Canada? Can you just give us some general tidbits on your experiences playing those two countries?
Yeah, sure. I had retired for a couple years, and so I ended up going back into professional football after I got married, which was kind of a new thing because in the NFL I wasn't married, and so it was fun for my wife to get a taste of, maybe not the NFL, but what it was like a little bit as a professional athlete. So, but some of my favorite football experiences were in Germany. The fans in Frankfurt were some of the best fans in the world, and you wouldn't expect it, but I think they're just used to standing up and pounding music and yelling and screaming at soccer games, and they did the same in football. I mean, it would be so loud, and they'd have the beer garden open, 2 to 4 hours before the game. So, and there would be confetti all over the place, and they'd just be chanting. They'd be chanting players' names. Mario Bailey was over there. He was at the same time I was, and he was quite a bit younger than me, and he was a legend over there. So that was some of the most fun football I've ever had and enjoyed. And it was fun that when my wife was able to enjoy that a little bit. We even had our first child was over there at the time, my second year in Frankfurt.
And did you enjoy playing in Canada for a year or two? I believe it was.
Yeah, I ended up getting hurt there. So, and I was in Winnipeg, so I was really only there half a season, which in a sense was a blessing because I didn't get to experience Winnipeg in the winter. But that was just took a little bit of a learning curve just because they have so many different rules, and you got 2 or 3 guys moving at the snap of the ball. And so it was fun just to get a taste of it. And, it was really a fun experience, but, it didn't last very long.
No fourth downs in the CFL, right?
That's right. You're right.
It's a little different football. Did you and your wife, were you guys able to travel around Europe a little bit when you played for Frankfurt?
Yeah. In fact, they flew us out early to Barcelona for a kind of a media thing. So we got to spend, some time out there. She has a Scottish background, and they had teams in London and Scotland. So she was able to travel around London and Scotland with her mom and meet up with us. And so, yeah, she was able to travel a fair bit as well.
Great. It's fun to hear about some of your experiences outside of the NFL as well. Well, what's in the future for Steve Pelluer? Feel free to share maybe what some of your family members are up to. Give us a little future. What's in it for your future and your families?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's been really fun to be reconnected at University of Washington with my son and kind of to meet his teammates. And it's been a passion of mine and my wife Jennifer to kind of help build a family atmosphere there within the team and the families that come from all over for games. So hopefully if Zeke continues to be there, we'll be able to, build more of a family atmosphere for the families that come in from out of town, just so there's more of a connection point. And I'm also working to try to build a mentorship program for not just the football players, but all the college athletes in the region that can help them with, mental health, spiritual, mental health issues, those kind of things.
Well, it seems like there's a lot going on. You know, when I think of like Romeo and Juliet, the Capulets and the Montagues, the Pollura family, you guys are kind of a combination of the Capulets and Montagues who kind of figure a way to get along, right, Steve? You know? So,
Yeah, I mean, we still have our Husky Cougar antagonistic attitude sometimes, but it's all in good fun. And you know, I've always loved the Cougars, and you know, always pulling for them if they're not playing the Huskies. So, and it was tough when my nephew was there to, you know, when they were playing the Huskies, just because you know, family always comes first.
that's always an interesting question, Husky Nation, whether a Husky fan should root for the Cougars when they're not playing Washington. So I'm kind of with you, but I've heard some debates on that subject. So. Well, Steve, thank you so much for doing this on Sports Untold. Really appreciate it. A lot of fun. I'm great to have you join my list of great interviewees, and have a great Christmas and holiday season. And thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Paul. It was a pleasure to meet you.
You too. Likewise, Steve. You stay safe.
Okay, bye bye.